In a quiet rural village where the earth was dry and cracked, lived a young woman named Amara. The village was small, surrounded by dusty fields and tired crops that depended on uncertain rain. Houses were built from mud and straw. Some were strong and painted in bright colors. Others, like Amara's, leaned slightly to one side as if even the walls were too tired to stand straight. Her home had only 2 small rooms. The roof leaked during the rainy season. When storms came, she and her mother placed old bowls on the floor to catch the dripping water. At night, the wind slipped through the cracks in the walls, whispering cold reminders of their poverty. Amara's father had died when she was 8 years old. He had worked hard in the fields, waking before sunrise and returning long after sunset. His hands were rough, his back bent from years of labor. One season, after a long sickness, he simply did not wake up again. His death left more than silence in the house. It left fear. Without him, money disappeared quickly. Food became scarce. Respect from others faded. Soon after, her mother fell ill. A sickness that never fully healed took her strength little by little. She moved slowly. She coughed often. Some days she could not leave her sleeping mat. So Amara became the strong one. She carried water from the well. She worked in other people's farms for small coins. She cooked simple meals of maize and greens. Some nights there was not enough food for both of them. On those nights, Amara would pretend she was not hungry so her mother could eat. But even in hardship, there was something about Amara that could not be hidden. She was intelligent. When elders spoke in the village square, she listened closely. When traders discussed prices, she understood quickly. She had sharp eyes and a calm way of speaking. And she was beautiful, not in a loud way but in a quiet, powerful way. Her skin was smooth and dark like polished wood. Her eyes were bright and thoughtful. When she walked, she carried herself with natural grace. Yet none of those things protected her from shame. In her village, respect did not belong to the kindest person. It belonged to the richest. The daughters of wealthy farmers wore colorful dresses stitched with fine thread. They had sandals that did not break. Their hair was decorated with beads that shined under the sun. When they walked through the market, people greeted them warmly. Mothers whispered about them as perfect brides for their sons. Amara noticed everything. One afternoon at the well, she waited her turn with her old clay pot. A group of wealthy girls stood nearby, laughing loudly. One of them glanced at Amara's faded dress and covered her mouth to whisper. Then the whisper turned into laughter. They joked that even the dust on the road looked richer than her clothes. One said she would never marry well because poverty had already claimed her like a curse. Amara felt her cheeks burn. She kept her eyes on the ground. Her fingers tightened around the rope of her water pot. She wanted to shout. She wanted to defend herself. But what could she say? They were not wrong about her poverty. She walked home that day with heavy steps. Each laugh echoed in her mind long after the voices had faded. Weeks later, a traveling merchant visited the village. He was searching for a wife for his son. The whole community buzzed with excitement. Amara dared to hope. She helped serve food during his visit. She spoke politely. When he asked about crop seasons and trade routes, she answered with surprising knowledge. The merchant looked impressed. For a brief moment, Amara felt something she had not felt in a long time. Possibility. But when the merchant quietly asked about her family background, and learned about her father's death and her mother's illness, his expression changed. He smiled politely. Too politely. Later, she overheard him telling the village elder that his son needed a wife from a stable family. A family with land and security. Not one struggling to survive. The words cut deeper than the laughter at the well. That night, Amara lay awake beside her mother's soft breathing. Moonlight entered through the cracks in the wall. She stared at the ceiling and felt something shift inside her. It was not sadness. It was not anger. It was determination. She was tired of lowering her eyes. Tired of being invisible. Tired of being judged before she even spoke. If respect came from wealth, then one day she would have wealth. If the world listened only to the rich, then one day the world would listen to her. In the quiet darkness, she made a silent vow. She would never be poor again. She would climb above this life no matter what it took. She did not yet know how. She did not yet know when. But something inside her had awakened. And sometimes, when desire burns strong enough, it begins to change the choices a person makes. Soon, Amara would learn that the hunger for respect can be just as dangerous as the hunger for food. And the path away from shame can lead straight into temptation. Months passed after Amara made her silent vow. Life in the village did not change. The roof still leaked. Her mother still coughed through the night. The wealthy girls still walked with pride through the market. But something inside Amara had changed. She no longer saw poverty as something to endure. She saw it as something to escape. One morning, news spread through the village like wildfire. A grand festival was to be held in a wealthy neighboring town. Important families would attend. Traders, landowners, respected elders, all would gather for music, celebration, and new connections. Amara's heart beat faster. This was her chance. Not to beg, not to hope for pity, but to be seen differently. She borrowed a beautiful dress from a distant cousin who rarely wore it. It was deep blue with golden stitching along the sleeves. She borrowed shining earrings from a neighbor. When she looked at herself in a small cracked mirror, she almost did not recognize the girl staring back. For once, she did not look like the daughter of poverty. She looked like someone important. The festival was louder and brighter than anything she had seen before. Drums echoed across the open fields. Dancers moved in circles. The smell of roasted meat and sweet drinks filled the air. Families gathered under large tents decorated with cloth and beads. Laughter rose like music itself. Amara walked carefully, holding her head high. She copied the posture of the wealthy women she had observed for years: slow steps, steady shoulders, calm eyes. Inside, however, her heart trembled. What if someone recognized her? What if her borrowed beauty was exposed? Then she saw him. He stood near the musicians, speaking to a group of elders. He was tall, dressed in fine but simple clothing. His movements were calm. His smile was gentle, not proud. His name was Kofi. She did not know who he was at first. She only knew that when his eyes met hers, something shifted. He approached her with respectful confidence. They began speaking about the music, then about trade, then about life beyond their villages. To her surprise, he listened carefully. When she shared her thoughts about farming seasons and market prices, he seemed impressed. He asked thoughtful questions. He treated her like her words mattered. For the first time in her life, Amara felt valued not for how she looked, but for how she thought. And then came the question she feared most. He asked about her family. Her chest tightened. She imagined his expression changing the moment he heard the truth. She imagined him stepping away politely, just like the merchant had done. In that single heartbeat of fear, a choice stood before her: truth or opportunity. Her mouth moved before her courage could stop it. She told him her father had been a wealthy trader who passed away years ago. The lie felt strange as it left her lips. Heavy, sure. But Kofi's face softened with sympathy. He said he was sorry for her loss. He did not question her. The relief that flooded her body was almost overwhelming. And then, she continued. She spoke of land her father had owned in another region. She mentioned workers who managed the farms. She hinted at inheritance waiting to be fully transferred. Each word built the lie higher. With every sentence, she felt both powerful and afraid. Kofi did not look impressed because of wealth. He looked impressed because he believed her story showed strength, a woman handling responsibility after loss. He saw dignity in her. And because he trusted her, he believed every word. As the evening grew darker and lanterns lit the festival grounds, Amara felt two strong emotions fighting inside her. Guilt whispered that she had crossed a dangerous line, but excitement shouted louder. Doors were opening. Respect was forming in his eyes. For once, she was not the poor girl from the mud house. She was someone worthy. They laughed together. They walked among the tents. Time seemed to move faster around them. Before the night ended, Kofi told her something that made her breath catch. He said he would like to formally introduce her to his family. He explained that they were respected landowners. That family approval mattered greatly to him. That he did not take such decisions lightly. The world seemed to tilt. Meeting his family meant her lie would grow roots. It would no longer be a small moment of fear. It would become her reality. She felt the weight of the decision pressing against her chest. But when she looked into his eyes, full of sincerity and hope, fear of losing him felt stronger than fear of lying. So she smiled. And she said yes. As she walked back home that night, the borrowed earrings felt heavier than before. She told herself it was just one small lie. Just a step toward a better life. But deep inside, something warned her. Lies do not stay small. They grow. And once they begin to grow, they demand more. The day Amara went to visit Kofi's family estate, her hands would not stop shaking. She had faced hunger. She had faced mockery. But this felt different. This felt like stepping into a world that could swallow her whole. As their carriage approached the estate, her breath slowed. The compound walls were tall and freshly painted. Large carved wooden doors stood proudly at the entrance. Two strong guards opened them without hesitation. Inside, the sight made her heart pound. The courtyard was wide and clean. Goats and cattle grazed calmly in fenced areas. Workers moved with purpose, carrying baskets and tools. The main house stood tall, with polished floors that reflected the sunlight. Wide windows were decorated with fine curtains. This was not borrowed beauty. This was real wealth, and she had claimed to belong to it. Kofi noticed her silence and gave her a reassuring smile. He believed in her completely. That belief both comforted and frightened her. His mother greeted them first. She was elegant, dressed in rich fabric that flowed with every step. Her posture was straight. Her eyes were sharp and observant. There was pride in her voice when she welcomed Amara. But there was also assessment. This was a woman who valued lineage, status, and reputation. Kofi's sister, Adwoa, stood slightly behind their mother. She did not smile warmly. Her gaze was steady, calculating. She studied Amara from head to toe as if measuring her. Then came the grandmother. She walked slowly with the help of a wooden cane. Her face was lined with age, but her eyes were soft and wise. She said little, but she noticed everything. They sat together for tea in the open courtyard. The questions began gently. Where exactly was her family land located? Which region had her father traded in? Who managed the farms now? Each question felt like a step across thin ice. Amara answered smoothly. She had spent nights thinking about these details. She spoke calmly, describing faraway regions and inventing names of workers who did not exist. Her voice did not shake, but inside her thoughts raced. Adwoa leaned slightly forward as she listened. Once or twice, her eyebrows lifted just a little, a silent sign of doubt. But Kofi smiled proudly beside Amara. He looked at her as if she was already part of the family. That look made it harder to stop. In the days that followed, Amara visited often. Each visit felt like walking deeper into a story she had created. She began observing the wealthy women around her. The way they spoke slowly and clearly. The way they never rushed. The way they avoided certain common phrases from rural villages. At home, she practiced speaking in a softer tone. She trained herself to hide her natural village accent. She adjusted her posture while walking. She learned which utensils to use during meals. Every small detail mattered. She was determined not to be exposed. But no matter how much she studied, anxiety followed her like a shadow. When servants passed by, she wondered if they sensed something strange. When Adwoa asked casual questions, Amara searched for hidden traps. The grandmother once held her hand and looked into her eyes for a long moment. There was something unsettling about that gaze. Not judgment. Understanding. As weeks passed, something unexpected happened. Amara truly began to fall in love with Kofi. His kindness was real. His laughter was warm. He defended her gently when Adwoa's questions felt too sharp. He spoke of building a future based on partnership, not control. He did not treat her as a prize. He treated her as an equal. That made her chest ache with guilt. Because the woman he trusted was not entirely real. One evening, as they walked near the livestock fields, he spoke about marriage. Not as a dream. As a plan. He explained how important family approval was, but he assured her that his heart had already chosen. The words felt heavy in the air. Marriage meant unity between families. It meant shared history. It meant deeper investigation. Amara's smile remained steady, but inside, fear tightened its grip. Her lie was no longer just about impressing a young man at a festival. It was about joining two families, two legacies, and she had built her place among them on words that were not true. As she returned home that night, she paused outside her small mud house. The walls were cracked. The roof sagged slightly. Her mother's cough echoed softly from inside. This was her real world, and she was trying to step into another. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of both lives pulling at her. She told herself she could manage it. She told herself the truth would never need to surface. But deep down she knew something dangerous. The higher she climbed on her lie, the harder the fall would be. The day the engagement was announced, the entire estate buzzed with excitement. Servants moved quickly across the courtyard. Relatives arrived with gifts. Women gathered to discuss fabrics and colors for the ceremony. The air felt alive with celebration. And yet, inside Amara's chest, there was only fear. In their tradition, an engagement was not just between two people. It was between two families. Elders would visit the bride's home. Gifts would be exchanged. Histories would be shared. That meant Kofi's family would expect to see her ancestral house. Her land. Her people. The very thing she had invented. When Kofi told her that his family would soon travel to her family estate to begin formal discussions, her breath caught in her throat. She forced a smile. Inside, panic spread like fire. That night she barely slept. She stared at the ceiling of her mud house, listening to her mother's quiet breathing. The walls around her felt smaller than ever. If Kofi's family saw this house, everything would collapse. Her promise to herself, to never be poor again, felt like it was slipping through her fingers. Desperation pushed her to act. She traveled to a distant town where a distant relative lived. He was not close to her, but he was known to struggle with money. She offered him a portion of what little savings she had, promising more if he agreed to pretend to be her uncle. She arranged for his modest but decent house to serve as her ancestral home. It was not grand, but it was far better than her own mud house. She instructed him on the story, about her late wealthy father, about the inherited land, about servants managing farms elsewhere. Each instruction tightened the knot in her stomach. More people were now part of the lie. More threads holding up a fragile story. The engagement ceremony arrived quickly. Kofi's family came dressed in rich fabrics, carrying gifts wrapped in bright cloth. Amara stood beside her hired uncle, praying silently that no one would ask too many questions. The meeting went smoothly at first. Elders exchanged greetings. Kola nuts were presented. Blessings were spoken. Amara kept her posture steady, her voice calm. But every time someone mentioned her father, her heart ached. She avoided bringing her real mother to the ceremony. She told Kofi's family that her mother was too weak to travel, that she preferred to rest. The truth was far more painful. She was ashamed. Ashamed of the cracked walls. Ashamed of the worn clothes. Ashamed of the woman who had sacrificed everything for her. Back in the village, her mother watched her prepare for the engagement with quiet eyes. There were no harsh questions. Only silence. One evening, her mother gently asked why she never brought Kofi to see their home. The question hung in the air. Amara felt her throat tighten. She spoke vaguely about timing and customs. She avoided looking directly at her mother. But her mother was not foolish. A mother knows when her child is hiding something. There was hurt in her mother's eyes, not anger but sorrow. Meanwhile, at Kofi's estate, not everyone was convinced. Adwoa had been watching carefully. She noticed how Amara sometimes hesitated before answering certain questions. She noticed small changes in her accent. She noticed that details about the family land seemed distant and unclear. One afternoon, during a family gathering, Adwoa questioned a minor detail about the location of the farms. Amara answered quickly, adjusting the story. Kofi stepped in immediately, defending her gently. He told his sister she was being overly suspicious. He reminded everyone that grief and responsibility after losing a father could make anyone guarded. His loyalty protected her. But it also made the weight of her deception heavier. The engagement was officially approved. Songs were sung. Hands were clapped. Blessings were given. On the outside, it was a moment of joy. On the inside, Amara felt like she was balancing on the edge of a cliff. Every smile required effort. Every celebration felt like a reminder that the foundation beneath her was not solid. Her love for Kofi had grown deep and real. When he spoke of building a life together, she believed him. She imagined a future filled with comfort and dignity. But that future was built on fragile ground. At night, when she returned to her mud house, she would sit quietly beside her mother and stare at the cracked walls. This was her truth, and she was hiding it. The lie that began as a single sentence at a festival had now become a living thing. It involved a fake uncle, a borrowed house, a missing mother, and a growing number of people who believed in her. As the wedding date began to be discussed, Amara felt the ground beneath her growing thinner. She had climbed far from the shame of her childhood. But the higher she climbed, the more terrifying the fall would be. And somewhere in the shadows, Adwoa's quiet suspicion was still growing. After the engagement, the celebration slowly faded, but the tension did not. In Kofi's family estate, preparations for the wedding had already begun. Fabrics were being chosen. Guest lists were growing longer. Musicians were being contacted. Everything was moving forward. Everything, except peace in Amara's heart. She could feel it. Something had shifted. Adwoa's eyes followed her more closely now. Her questions sounded casual, but they carried weight. One afternoon, while women gathered to discuss wedding decorations, Adwoa gently asked about the exact boundaries of Amara's family land. The question sounded simple. Friendly, even. But Amara felt her pulse quicken. She answered carefully, describing rivers and fields she had never seen. She added small details, hoping they would sound convincing. Adwoa nodded slowly. Too slowly. That night, Adwoa made a quiet decision. Without telling anyone, she sent a trusted servant to the region Amara had claimed as her family's home. She instructed him to verify the existence of the estate, to speak with locals, to confirm the name of the wealthy trader Amara had described as her father. It was not anger that drove Adwoa. It was suspicion. Meanwhile, Amara felt something was wrong, though she did not know why. She began waking up in the middle of the night, her heart racing. Sweat covered her forehead even when the air was cool. In her dreams, she stood before a crowd of villagers. They pointed at her. They laughed. They called her a liar. Sometimes she saw Kofi's face in her dreams, not smiling but disappointed. The shame she had once escaped now chased her through sleep. During one visit to the estate, the grandmother called Amara to sit beside her under a large tree in the courtyard. The old woman's voice was soft but steady. She spoke about life, about tradition, about roots. Then she said something that struck deep. A tree without roots cannot stand for long. The words were simple, but they felt like a warning. Amara swallowed hard. She forced a polite smile, but inside, fear tightened around her chest. Was the grandmother hinting at something? Did she know? As days passed, Amara's mind became a battlefield. Every time Kofi smiled at her, guilt stabbed her heart. He trusted her completely. He spoke proudly of her strength and intelligence. He told relatives how fortunate he felt. The love in his voice made the truth harder to carry. One evening, as they walked together near the livestock fields, the sky painted in orange and gold, Amara almost confessed. The words rose inside her. She imagined telling him everything, about the mud house, about her sick mother, about the fear that pushed her to lie. She imagined the relief of honesty. But then another image followed. His face changing. His trust breaking. His family rejecting her. And she froze. Fear won again. She told herself it was too late to turn back. That confessing now would only cause more pain. But deep down she knew something worse was coming. Because lies do not disappear. They wait. One afternoon, the servant Adwoa had sent returned quietly to the estate. He carried news. There was no wealthy estate in the region Amara had described. No record of a rich trader with her father's name. Instead, villagers there spoke of a poor family in another area, a mud house, a sick mother, a hard-working daughter. Adwoa listened carefully as the servant spoke. Her suspicions hardened into certainty. She did not immediately tell her mother or brother. Instead, she gathered more proof. She located a man from Amara's real village who sometimes traveled for trade. She questioned him gently, pretending simple curiosity. The truth came out easily. Amara's father had been a struggling farmer. There was no land, no inheritance, no wealth. Adwoa felt anger rising, not only at Amara, but at the humiliation her family might face. She began planning. Meanwhile, Amara sensed the shift in the air. Conversation seemed to pause when she entered rooms. Glances lasted longer than before. Whispers faded quickly when she walked past. Her anxiety grew stronger with each passing day. The wedding date was near. Drums were being prepared. Invitations were being sent. And beneath all the celebration, a storm was forming. Amara stood at the edge of everything she had dreamed of. But the foundation beneath her was cracking. And very soon, it would break. The wedding day arrived like a storm disguised as celebration. The estate was alive with music. Drums echoed across the courtyard. Guests from distant towns filled the open spaces, dressed in colorful fabrics that shimmered under the sun. Servants carried trays of food. Children ran laughing between the legs of elders. The air smelled of roasted meat, fresh flowers, and anticipation. Amara sat in her gown, the fabric heavy and flowing, adorned with jewels she had borrowed for the day. Her hands shook slightly, though her face remained calm. She smiled as Kofi approached, offering his hand. His eyes were full of love and pride. She wanted to believe the day was perfect. She wanted to believe nothing could touch her carefully constructed world. But the first sign of trouble came quietly, almost unnoticed. Adwoa appeared at the edge of the crowd, dressed elegantly yet carrying something heavier than any fabric could weigh: certainty. Her eyes locked on Amara's, sharp and unwavering. Behind her, a man from Amara's Real village walked slowly forward. His presence sent a ripple of unease through the crowd, a ripple that quickly became a wave. The drums continued, but their rhythm no longer matched the pulse of the day. Adwoa stepped forward, holding evidence in her hands. Witnesses from Amara's true home confirmed the facts. The mud house, the sick mother, the lack of land, the poverty her lie had tried to hide. She spoke clearly so everyone could hear. Every word cut like a blade. The crowd turned, murmurs rising into gasps and whispers. The bride's carefully built world began crumbling in real time. Kofi's face went pale. He opened his mouth but no words came. His hand, which had held hers moments ago, fell to his side. Confusion, hurt, and disbelief crossed his features all at once. His mother's lips pressed tightly together. Fury and humiliation burned in her eyes. She took in the crowd, her face reddening as realization sank in. The grand family celebration was now tainted by the truth of deceit. Amara stood frozen for a heartbeat, then collapsed to her knees. The gown she had chosen to impress became a weight, a reminder of the life she had tried to claim. Tears streamed down her face. She did not deny it. She did not speak to explain. She only let the truth fall from her in silent waves, exposing the shame she had tried to escape all these years. The guests whispered and shifted uncomfortably. Some turned away, unwilling to witness the collapse. Others stared, eyes wide with surprise. The musicians faltered, the drums slowing. The ceremonial order dissolved into stunned silence. Kofi struggled to comprehend it. His love and his trust were now tangled with betrayal and humiliation. He had believed in her story, and now that belief lay in ruins. Amara's mother, who had quietly arrived unseen, appeared at the back of the crowd. Her face was lined with worry and sorrow. She did not shout. She did not blame. She only watched, heartbreaking for her daughter, knowing the weight of shame that had always followed her. The ceremony could not continue. The music died. The laughter vanished. Drums fell silent. What was meant to be a celebration of love had turned into a public exposure of lies, mirroring the humiliation Amara had first felt as a child. As the sun blazed above the estate, Amara remained on her knees. Her mind replayed every choice that had led her here. Every lie. Every borrowed word. Every moment of fear disguised as opportunity. The world had witnessed her deception. There was no hiding anymore. No borrowed dresses, no staged houses, no fabricated inheritance. The girl who once longed for respect now faced the harsh reality of shame in its purest, most public form. And in that collapse, she felt the weight of a truth she had been avoiding her entire life. Lies can carry a dream for a while, but they can never build a life. The wedding was halted. The guests dispersed slowly, some in pity, others in judgment. Kofi's mother withdrew into her inner rooms, still furious. Kofi himself turned away, eyes haunted, heart torn between love and betrayal. Amara's knees ached, but it was nothing compared to the ache inside her chest. Her tears fell freely now, cleansing and painful, marking the beginning of a journey she had no choice but to face, a journey through shame, loss, and the long road toward redemption. The day after the wedding fiasco, the world felt heavier for Amara. Kofi refused to see her. Not because he didn't care, but because his heart was caught between love and betrayal, and he needed distance to process the truth. His mother and Adwoa avoided her completely, their disappointment and anger hanging in the air like a thick fog. The estate, once a place of warmth and hope, now felt cold and silent. Word traveled fast. Villagers whispered in markets and along dusty roads. The story of Amara's deception spread quickly, carried by curious tongues and eager ears. Some spoke of her cleverness, others of her shame. Her name became a warning. Even distant relatives who had once admired her cautious intelligence now viewed her with suspicion. Amara returned to her real home, the small, sagging mud house that had always been her sanctuary and her shame. The walls, cracked and sun-baked, now seemed to mock her. She carried the weight of public disgrace on her shoulders, heavier than the bundles of firewood she hauled daily. Her mother met her at the doorway. Her face was lined with sorrow, not anger. There were no harsh words, no shouting. Only the quiet pain of a mother who had loved her child fiercely and watched her stumble under the burden of pride and fear. "Why?" her mother asked softly, her voice trembling slightly. Amara's chest tightened. She could not hide anything now. She sank to the ground beside her mother, burying her face in her mother's worn hands. Tears came freely, mingling with the dust of the floor. She admitted everything, the lies, the borrowed clothes, the fake estate, the stolen stories of wealth. She spoke of the fear that had driven her, the shame that had poisoned her mind since childhood, and the desperate hope that one day, people would finally respect her. Her mother listened, squeezing her hand. There was no censure, only quiet understanding. She had always known her daughter's heart was strong, even if misguided. Amara realized something in that moment. Her lies had been born from the same shame she had felt as a child, the deep, gnawing embarrassment of poverty. But she also saw the harsh truth that wealth alone could never erase the pain of her past. The respect she had longed for was never about money, it was about dignity, about being seen and valued for who she truly was. The days following the exposure were lonely. Kofi's absence left a hollow ache in her chest. Villagers who once smiled at her passed with cold eyes or whispered behind her back. Even her so-called allies seemed distant. Yet in that isolation, Amara began to reflect. She remembered her vow to rise above poverty. She realized that she had pursued wealth to escape shame, but had ignored the more important path: honesty, courage, and self-respect. She began to understand that redemption could not be borrowed or stolen. It had to be earned, step by step, through actions that spoke louder than words. And so, in the quiet of her humble home, beside her ailing mother, Amara made a new promise. She would rebuild, not with lies, not with borrowed beauty, not with false stories of wealth. She would rebuild with truth, integrity, and her own strength. It would not be easy. She knew the path ahead was steep and long. But for the first time she felt the faint spark of hope, a spark that no shame, no gossip, and no heartbreak could ever extinguish. This was the beginning of a journey not just to regain respect, but to find herself. A journey toward becoming a woman who could face the world without fear, without deception, and with a heart that had finally learned the power of truth. Amara's days after the public humiliation were quiet, but they were filled with hard work, reflection, and determination. The mud house, once a symbol of shame, became her anchor. She swept the floor carefully, cooked simple meals, and tended the small garden outside. Each small action reminded her that honesty was no longer a choice. It was survival, dignity, and growth. She began to think about the skills she had honed over the years: her intelligence, her patience, and her ability to organize. With a few coins she had saved, she bought supplies to start a small trade. She crafted simple goods and sold them at local markets: hand-woven baskets, dried herbs, and small embroidered items. Slowly, villagers began to notice her diligence. They admired the way she kept her promises, paid debts on time, and treated customers with respect. Word spread. The girl who had fallen from grace was building a new life, one rooted in truth. Amara's mother watched with quiet pride. She helped her daughter pack goods for the market and offered advice. There was no pity in her eyes, only respect. Amara felt something she had never truly known: the power of her own effort, the strength of standing tall without pretending to be someone else. She did not seek forgiveness from Kofi, not yet. The pain of the betrayal lingered in both their hearts, but she focused on the path she could control. Every coin she earned, every transaction completed honestly, built not just her livelihood but her sense of self-worth. Over time, she extended her efforts to help other women in the village. She taught them to make baskets, to weave, to sell goods in nearby markets. Their confidence grew, and with it, the respect of the community. Slowly, the whispers about her lies began to fade, replaced by admiration for her resilience. Kofi, meanwhile, heard of her transformation. He observed quietly from a distance, torn between pride in her growth and lingering hurt from the past. He saw her courage, her quiet strength, and her refusal to beg for his forgiveness. Every success she achieved without his help reminded him that the woman he loved had never needed wealth to be remarkable. She needed only honesty and determination. Amara's days were long, and her hands often ached, but her heart felt lighter than it had in years. She realized that true respect was not given because of riches or status. It was earned through integrity, hard work, and the courage to face one's mistakes. She no longer feared poverty because she had discovered something greater: the ability to stand on her own, to be seen for who she truly was, and to shape her destiny without relying on lies or borrowed prestige. As the sun set over her humble home, Amara paused to watch the sky turn shades of orange and gold. She thought of the path she had taken, the shame, the lies, the exposure, and she realized that the most important journey was still ahead: rebuilding trust, reclaiming love, and embracing a life built entirely on truth. For the first time she felt steady. She felt strong. And she knew no matter what storms came next, she could face them with honesty, courage, and the quiet dignity she had fought so hard to reclaim. Months passed. The village whispered less about Amara's past, and the markets came to know her as a woman of integrity. Yet one person remained absent from her life: Kofi. His silence had been painful, a constant echo of the trust that had once been broken. Then one afternoon he arrived at her small home. He did not bring gifts or pomp. He came simply, standing at the edge of the courtyard, observing her as she worked. The air between them was heavy with unspoken words, shared history, and the weight of betrayal. Amara felt her chest tighten. She knew this was the moment she had both dreaded and longed for. Kofi stepped closer. His eyes searched hers, trying to see the girl he had loved behind the lies. She let herself meet his gaze fully. There was no evasiveness this time. No borrowed stories, no carefully chosen words to impress. Only truth. In her mind, she rehearsed the confessions she had avoided for months. She admitted the fear that had driven her to lie, the shame of poverty that had haunted her since childhood, and the desperate hope that one day someone would see her as more than her circumstances. She let him understand that every false story had been born from vulnerability, not cruelty. Kofi listened. His face softened, but the hurt lingered. He had loved her for who he believed she was. That trust had been broken, and the wound ran deep. Yet as he watched her recount the truth, he saw the transformation she had undergone, not just in her circumstances but in her character. The girl who had once hidden behind lies was now standing openly, humbly, and honestly. He admitted, in his own silent way, that he had loved her not for wealth, not for status, but for her spirit, the intelligence, kindness, and resilience that had drawn him to her from the start. The betrayal had hurt because he valued honesty above all else, but seeing her growth and humility allowed a seed of forgiveness to take root. They stood together in the small courtyard, the sun casting long shadows across the earth. Words were few, but the emotions were vast. The air carried relief, sorrow, understanding, and the fragile beginnings of reconciliation. Amara did not ask for his forgiveness. She did not beg. She only showed him that she had changed and that her life, now built on truth, could be shared with him honestly. Kofi felt the weight of the past lighten. Trust would not return instantly, but it had begun to return. He saw the woman she had become, a woman strong enough to face the world, humble enough to admit her mistakes, and wise enough to learn from them. For both, the confrontation was not an ending. It was a bridge. A space where hurt met honesty and where love could begin again, not as a naive hope, but as a deliberate, patient choice. And in that quiet moment, they understood something essential. The past could not be erased, but it could inform a future built on truth, respect, and the courage to start anew. The first steps toward reconciliation had begun, and this time, there would be no lies between them, only the slow, steady rebuilding of trust and love. The morning of the second wedding dawned gentle and quiet, far removed from the chaos of the first. The sun poured golden light over the small courtyard, illuminating the flowers Amara had planted herself. The air carried the soft scent of freshly baked bread and blooming jasmine, a calm that felt like a promise. This time, there were no borrowed dresses or fabricated stories. Amara wore a simple gown, modest but elegant, sewn with her own careful hands. Her mother stood proudly beside her, her face lined with worry that had softened into joy. There was no shame in the presence of the woman who had always loved her unconditionally. The mud walls of her home no longer felt like a cage. They felt like a foundation, honest and strong. Kofi arrived, his expression a mix of relief, pride, and quiet happiness. He had witnessed Amara's journey from deception to integrity, and he now approached her not with the caution of betrayal, but with the patience of understanding. Her courage had opened a door to trust once more, and he stepped through it willingly. Even the family who had once judged her, the grandmother, the mother, and even Adwoa, stood nearby. The grandmother's eyes held warmth and approval, recognizing Amara's growth and strength. Kofi's mother, having seen her honesty and perseverance, now offered a gentle smile. Adwoa, initially skeptical, watched quietly, her sharp pride softened by the example of humility and hard-won respect. The ceremony was intimate. Songs rose softly into the morning air. Hands were joined, blessings spoken. Every gesture was rooted in truth rather than pretense, every vow given from the heart rather than for appearances. Amara felt a quiet strength as she took Kofi's hand. This was different from the first ceremony. There was no fear of exposure. No anxiety about who she was or what she owned. She walked forward not as a wealthy woman, not as a bride built on lies, but as herself, a woman who had learned the value of honesty, dignity, and resilience. The villagers who attended understood the lesson as well. Wealth had not been the prize. Respect had not been purchased. True riches were found in character, courage, and the ability to face one's mistakes and rise above them. When Amara looked around, she saw the faces of those who had doubted her, those who had whispered and judged, and even those who had once mocked her at the well. Now they witnessed her strength and grace, undeniable and untainted. As she and Kofi stepped forward together, a soft breeze brushed against her face. She realized that the long path of shame, lies, and redemption had led to this moment, not a perfect life but an honest one. And that honesty, she understood, was worth more than any riches she had once dreamed of. Hand in hand, she entered her new life. Not as a rich woman. not as a bride built on illusions, but as a truthful one. And for the first time in her life, Amara felt whole.